Have you ever stopped to wonder, if Dajjal is the greatest test mankind will ever face, then how did this test begin? Was he born into this world like any other child? Did he cry at birth, breathe the same air, nurse from his mother's arms like the rest of us? Or was his coming something far more chilling, an event so wrapped in mystery and divine warning that it stands outside the normal rules of life and creation? The emergence of Dajjal is not just another chapter in the book of the end times. It is the climax of deception, the ultimate trial, the one that will shake the very foundation of faith itself. But the question that few ask is, where did this deception begin? Before he claimed to be a god, before he performed illusions and spread confusion across the earth, Dajjal was something else. He was born, or perhaps brought forth, into a world that would one day witness his terrible rise. And it is this moment of his origin, this moment that no one remembers but everyone fears, that may hold the key to understanding the threat he truly poses. Islamic teachings make one thing abundantly clear. The coming of Dajjal is not an accidental event. It is not a surprise or an afterthought in the divine plan. It is a test designed by Allah Himself to expose the hearts of people, to separate those who merely claim belief from those whose faith is unshakable. And so, if his emergence is purposeful, then surely his beginning must also be steeped in intention. Unlike prophets, whose births are surrounded by mercy and divine light, Dajjal's entry into the world is draped in ominous signs and disturbing whispers. Some scholars have suggested that his soul was destined for deception even before his body took form, that his existence was written not in mercy, but in trial. In fact, many hadith hint at the sheer terror that surrounds his presence. The Prophet Muhammad warned again and again about the fitna of Dajjal, saying there is no trial from the beginning of creation until the day of judgment greater than his. So how could a trial so vast, so devastating, emerge from something normal? How could a soul meant to shake the faith of nations be born in the same way as the rest of us? Surely something deeper lies beneath the surface of his story. And that leads us into the heart of the mystery. Was Dajjal ever truly human? This question has puzzled scholars for centuries. The Qur'an does not explicitly speak of his birth, but authentic hadiths and the interpretations of classical scholars provide chilling possibilities. Some believe that Dajjal was indeed born to human parents, but the child they received was far from ordinary. According to certain reports, a couple long plagued by infertility finally bore a son, but his birth did not bring joy. From the moment he emerged, there was something off about him. His eyes were unusual, his body was misshapen. He remained eerily silent. There was a heaviness in the air, a kind of spiritual suffocation that even the animals around could feel. The midwives were shaken. The parents, once filled with hope, grew silent with fear. This was no miracle child. This was something else entirely, something the world was not ready for. Yet not all agree he was born like other children. Another school of thought argues that Dajjal's origin is not rooted in biology at all. They suggest that he is not the result of natural reproduction, but a direct creation, a being formed by divine command, like Adam or the angels. But unlike Adam, created in honor, or the angels, formed from light, Dajjal was created as a mirror of what happens when deception walks in human form. His body was shaped to mislead, his spirit infused with fitna. He was brought into existence not as a mercy, but as a test so severe that even the most righteous would tremble before it. In this view, Dajjal is a sign, not a citizen of any nation or descendant of any lineage. He is a trial given form, a shadow given breath. Still, others lean into more symbolic interpretations. They say Dajjal represents a culmination of human error, a reflection of collective sin, that his existence is not just one being, but the manifestation of a world that has lost its grip on truth, that he was born the moment the world began preferring illusion over reality, wealth over righteousness, and ego over worship. In that sense, his birth is not behind us. It is happening still, growing stronger as the world walks further from divine guidance. But whether you see him as a literal being with parents, or a dark creation waiting in chains, or a living embodiment of spiritual decay, one truth echoes through every narration. Dajjal is not normal. His existence breaks the rules of what we know. His presence was never meant to comfort, but to challenge. And before he ever spoke a word, his very being was a whisper of the storm to come. The identity of Dajjal's parents has long remained a source of speculation, debate, and mystery among scholars of Islamic tradition. While no authentic hadith directly names them, various narrations and classical commentaries offer chilling theories and glimpses into what kind of people may have brought this figure into the world. One of the more widely circulated views is that Dajjal was indeed born to human parents, ordinary in appearance, but perhaps not in character. According to some reports, they were a couple who struggled with infertility for many years. Their longing for a child became desperate, and when they were finally granted one, they believed it to be a divine blessing. But from the moment the child arrived, joy was overshadowed by fear. This was no ordinary baby. The mother, once glowing with the hope of motherhood, was struck by deep anxiety. The father, proud at first, soon grew distant, disturbed by what he saw. The child's features were unnatural, his gaze unsettled even the boldest among them. Some accounts describe him as having an abnormally wide chest, unusually muscular limbs, and a single eye that burned with an intensity beyond understanding. Neighbors whispered, elders refused to come near, and animals, creatures who cannot be deceived, reacted with unexplainable fear. In another account, the father is described as a tall, strong man with broad shoulders and commanding presence, while the mother was bent and frail, her body curved like a question mark. A woman burdened not just by age or labor, but by the spiritual weight of what she had brought into the world. The contrast between the two was stark, almost symbolic. The strength of defiance paired with the weakness of submission. Some traditions even claim that both parents were of Jewish descent and lived in a remote region of the East. However, it's essential to approach such claims with caution, as the Prophet did not confirm these details, and we are warned not to base beliefs on weak or fabricated reports. What matters more than names or lineage is the spiritual truth behind the story. Whether they were Jews, pagans, or simply misguided souls, the consistent theme is that Dajjal's birth was not welcomed by nature. It was not celebrated in the heavens. It was not a birth of light, but of disturbance. There are also darker interpretations, ones that claim his parents were not just innocent people caught in a cosmic plan, but active participants in something sinister. Some scholars suggest that Dajjal's parents were involved in occult practices, rituals that defied the commands of Allah and flirted with the unseen. According to this view, Dajjal's existence was not the result of a holy union, but a cursed act, perhaps even a spiritual transaction with forces beyond human comprehension. These narrations paint a terrifying picture, a couple so desperate for power, wealth, or lineage that they sacrificed their morality, and in return were given a child who would carry the fitna of deception until the final days. Whether symbolic or literal, these theories are unified in one thing. Dajjal's parents may have existed in the shadows, but the child they produced would one day attempt to block out the sun. And if the identity of his parents is mysterious, then the signs that accompanied his birth are even more chilling. Across Islamic historical literature, though not always authenticated in chain, we find recurring mentions of strange and disturbing events that unfolded on the night of his arrival. The environment itself seemed to reject his coming. The skies, once clear, darkened unnaturally. Stars flickered erratically, and winds howled without cause. Some accounts even claim that the night turned momentarily bright, not with divine light, but with an eerie, unnatural glow, as if the universe itself paused to mark the birth of a fitna that would one day shake the earth. This was not a light that brought peace. It brought silence, dread, and questions that had no answers. In villages nearby, animals acted as though a predator had entered their midst. Dogs howled continuously, their cries sharp and panicked. Birds flew from their nests as if sensing something that eyes could not see. Even the cattle refused to settle, kicking and groaning, their instincts warning them of something foul in the air. And it wasn't just the animals. People, too, reported feeling unease. An unexplained pressure in the chest, a sense of being watched, as though a pair of unseen eyes had just opened upon the world. There are reports of an unbearable stench spreading through the area, sour and pungent, filling homes and streets with a smell no one could explain. Mothers clutched their babies tighter. Men stood in silence, unable to shake off the weight of the atmosphere. Something had changed, something had been unleashed. According to some interpretations, Dajjal was born with physical deformities that defied nature. His eye, even at birth, was malformed. One was dead and sunken, while the other bulged unnaturally, as if trying to see a world it was not welcome in. His skin was said to be thick and ruddy, his limbs unusually developed for a newborn. Some accounts even go so far as to say that he uttered sounds, intelligible or not, from the very moment he emerged from the womb, causing midwives to flee in terror. These claims, while not rooted in Sahih Hadith, have been echoed in various Islamic historical texts for generations, hinting at the deep unease that scholars and believers alike have felt when contemplating the birth of such a being. This is not the beginning of a man, it is the awakening of a storm. And it is this very storm that the Prophet, peace be upon him, warned about, a storm that would one day gather strength, walk among us, and dare to call itself divine. Whether we believe all the details or accept only the ones verified by strong narration, the theme is undeniable. Dajjal's birth was not quiet. It was not hidden in the folds of ordinary life. It was a disturbance, felt by the earth, sensed by the skies, and whispered about in every corner of the unseen. It was a night that history tried to forget, but destiny would never allow to be erased. And it was only the beginning. What if you could recognize the greatest deceiver in history, not by his words, not by his promises, but simply by looking at him? What if his face, his body, his very form screamed a warning so loud that the soul trembled before the tongue even spoke? That is exactly what the Prophet Muhammad gave us. Not just verbal warnings about Dajjal, but physical descriptions so specific, so haunting, that every believer would have the chance to know him for what he truly is. Unlike any ordinary man, Dajjal's appearance is not simply unusual. It is a mirror of his inner corruption. The Prophet described him as one-eyed, but not in a way that could be mistaken or overlooked. His right eye is defective, ruined, hollow, like a withered grape floating in its socket. In other narrations, his eye is blind, dull and lifeless, offering no light or clarity. It does not function, nor does it inspire trust. His left eye, by contrast, is bulging and sharp, protruding with a gleam that feels more like intrusion than sight. It is a gaze that pierces, not to understand, but to dominate. This horrifying contrast between the two eyes is more than physical, it's symbolic. one eye blind, the other deceptive, one void of truth, the other bursting with illusion. He sees the world, but only through the lens of deception. He understands power, but not mercy. He observes mankind, but only to mislead it, and the signs do not end there. On his forehead, clear and undeniable, will be the Arabic letters Kfr, Kaf, Fa, Ra. Together they form the word kafir, disbeliever, a mark not hidden, not subtle, but exposed as a divine safeguard. The Prophet stated that every believer, regardless of their literacy, will be able to read this word. It is not about education, it is about perception. The heart that is alive with faith will recognize the sign, even if the eyes have never read a single book. And this mark is not just a warning to the world, it is a declaration from Allah. This man is false, and those who follow him are blinded not by ignorance, but by a corrupted soul. Descriptions of Dajjal's body paint a picture of a being designed to unsettle. He is massive in build, broader than most, and intimidating in stature. His body is not lean like a prophet's, nor noble like a warrior's. It is heavy, distorted, almost swollen with an unnatural presence. His skin, described in various narrations, is reddish or fair. His hair is thick, tangled and curly, falling like coils that trap rather than flow. His walk is unbalanced. He limps or strides in a way that suggests both power and brokenness. Some say his legs are set wide apart, making his movement awkward yet commanding. Everything about him contradicts harmony. He is a being of imbalance between light and dark, truth and lie, creation and distortion. And yet, despite his grotesque form, Dajjal will not be rejected by everyone. That is the true horror. His words will soothe, his false miracles will seduce, and many will ignore the very signs that Allah placed on his body. Why? Because their hearts were already blind. They wanted a savior who promised comfort, wealth, and control, not truth, discipline, and submission. They will follow the form, not the message. They will chase his glamour and overlook his deformities. And in doing so, they will walk straight into the jaws of the greatest deception the world has ever seen. The physical features of Dajjal are not just to warn us about him. They are to test what lies inside us. Will we see with our eyes or will we see with our hearts? Now, while his appearance is disturbing, his location is perhaps even more unsettling. Where is this being now? Is he somewhere on earth, breathing the same air, staring at the same stars, counting down the days until he emerges? The Qur'an does not name the place, but the Hadith of Tamim al-Dari radiyallahu anhu offers us a glimpse into a terrifying truth. Dajjal is not a future creation. He already exists. Tamim, a Christian at the time, had set out on a sea voyage with a group of companions. They were lost at sea for days, battered by waves, directionless, until they stumbled upon an island unlike any other. This was not a tropical paradise or an empty shore. It was eerie, isolated, and alive with unseen movement. There, they encountered a strange creature, hairy and featureless, called Al-Jassasa, the spy. It directed them to a monastery or cave, where a massive man was chained from head to toe. His hair was thick and tangled, his body large and terrifying. He questioned them about the world, asking whether the Prophet of Arabia had appeared and whether the palm trees of Baisan still bore fruit. When Tamim and his companions returned and relayed the story to the Prophet, peace be upon him, he confirmed it plainly. That chained man was Dajjal. This hadith is a turning point. It tells us that Dajjal was already alive during the Prophet's time, but he was not roaming free. He was confined, imprisoned on a mysterious island by the will of Allah. The exact location of this island remains unknown. Some suggest it lies in the east, near the region of Khurasan, encompassing parts of modern-day Iran, Afghanistan, and Central Asia. Others believe it to be in an uncharted part of the sea, inaccessible to ordinary travel. Wherever it is guarded, it is hidden, it is isolated not by man, but by divine protection. Dajjal is not slumbering, he is watching, he is waiting, and he is very much alive. What keeps him there? Only the decree of Allah. When the time is right, when the hearts of people are weakest, when ignorance is widespread and truth is rare, the chains will break, and he will rise, not as a child, not as a man in need of training or power, but fully formed, fully deceptive, and fully ready to unleash his mission. His presence on that island is not a myth or legend. It is a reality described and confirmed by the Prophet, peace be upon him, himself. And that reality should shake us to our core, because while we go about our lives chasing distractions, drowning in dunya, the greatest test to ever walk this earth is simply waiting for the signal, waiting for the collapse of barriers, waiting for a world so blind that it will welcome him with open arms. So the question is not where is Dajjal now? The question is, how close are we to unlocking his chains? One of the most haunting truths in Islamic tradition is that Dajjal is not a myth waiting to be born in the distant future. He is not a prophecy still waiting to be fulfilled in some far-off era. He is alive now, breathing, thinking, watching, waiting. This isn't a theory or speculation. This is confirmed in the Hadith of Tamim al-Dari radiallahu anhu, a man who saw Dajjal with his own eyes and reported his chilling encounter directly to the Prophet Muhammad. Tamim was a Christian sailor at the time, who got lost at sea along with a group of companions. After days adrift, they reached a strange island where they encountered a creature so strange, so grotesque, that it defied comprehension. Al-Jassasa, a beast covered entirely in hair, with no distinction between its front and back. This creature was not hostile but curious. It led them to a cave or structure where they found a colossal man, chained tightly from his chest to his ankles, restrained in a way that suggested not imprisonment by humans, but confinement decreed by something far greater. This man, huge in form, terrifying in presence, began asking questions, not casual ones, but specific and unnerving. Have the palm trees of Baisan borne fruit? Has the spring of Zugar dried up? Has the unlettered prophet appeared in Arabia? When Tamim and his group answered, the chained man responded with chilling certainty, declaring, "As for the prophet, if he has appeared, then soon I will be given permission to emerge." When the prophet heard this narration, he stood before his companions and confirmed its truth. The man Tamim saw was Dajjal. This isn't poetic metaphor or symbolic storytelling. It is a direct acknowledgement that Dajjal existed in the Prophet's time, living and conscious, held back by divine command, his appearance delayed but inevitable. From that moment, the companions understood something terrifying. The greatest deceiver was not a legend or a future event. He was already part of this world, simply veiled from it. Many scholars believe that Dajjal's continued life, extended over centuries, is not without precedent. Just as Allah allowed the long life of figures like Prophet Isa alayhi salam or Iblis, Dajjal too has been granted a prolonged existence, not as a blessing, but as a test for humanity. He doesn't grow old in the way we understand aging. His condition is preserved by divine decree for a single purpose: to emerge at the appointed time, at the precise moment when humanity is most vulnerable. And every day that passes, that moment draws closer. We live in an age where truth is ridiculed, where lies are celebrated, where miracles are demanded, but faith is mocked. This is the soil in which Dajjal will plant his seeds. A world drowning in confusion is the perfect stage for a deceiver. But why hasn't he emerged yet? What is stopping him from unleashing his deception upon the world? The answer is one of both divine mercy and prophetic warning. Dajjal cannot act until Allah gives him permission. He remains chained not just physically but spiritually, his time not yet come. His emergence is tied to other major signs of the hour, such as the spread of ignorance, the abandonment of religious knowledge, the rise of false leaders, and the growing absence of sincere faith. The Prophet warned us that the world will become spiritually hollow, filled with people who recite Qur'an but fail to act upon it, who speak of religion but live for worldly gain. When that tipping point arrives, when enough hearts have gone blind, when truth is buried beneath noise and illusion, then Dajjal will rise. It is crucial to understand that his delay is not a pause in danger, it is a countdown, a waiting game. Every generation that thinks they are safe is merely being tested. Will they prepare before his emergence? Will they educate themselves, their children, their communities? Will they cling to the guidance of the Prophet, peace be upon him, or be swept away by the dazzling promises of a false Messiah? Because, make no mistake, when the moment comes, Dajjal will not step onto a stage like a villain in a play. He will arrive with force, with charisma, and with the ability to reshape reality before the eyes of the ignorant. And what a terrifying entrance it will be. When he is finally unchained, Dajjal will not appear to the world as a monster. He will come as a savior. He will arrive during a time of global despair, when the earth is plagued by famine, when resources are scarce, when wars have ravaged lands and hope is a dying ember. And into that chaos, he will step forward, offering miracles. Rain will fall at his command. Crops will grow in dead soil. Graves will seem to open and the dead appear to rise. He will revive the hearts of the desperate, not with truth, but with spectacle. And people will believe. He will start by claiming to be a reformer, a righteous leader. His speeches will be eloquent, his promises appealing. He will unite the broken and feed the hungry. But gradually, his claims will escalate. First, he will say he is sent by God. Then he will say he is God. And tragically, many will believe him, because he will not only speak with authority, he will manipulate the physical world around him. His illusions will be so powerful that even the eyes of some believers will struggle to see through them. Mountains of food, rivers flowing in barren lands, control over wealth and water. He will appear to give life, while in reality he only spreads destruction. Those with weak faith will be the first to fall. They will worship him not because they trust his words, but because they fear starvation. They will not recognize his deception because they never trained their hearts to see truth without miracles. They will bow not out of love, but out of need. And thus the greatest trial will begin, not with violence, but with seduction. Not with blood, but with promises. The Prophet said that some people will follow Dajjal thinking they are doing the right thing. That is how deep his fitna will go. It will twist the very concept of righteousness. But not all will be deceived. The Prophet gave us the tools to resist him. Surah Al-Kahf, recited every Friday, acts as a shield against his deception. Its verses teach about the unseen, about patience, about trials, about the illusion of worldly power. It is no coincidence that these lessons are the very antidote to Dajjal's lies. Believers who recite and reflect upon it will recognize Dajjal for what he is. Their hearts will not tremble before his illusions. Their eyes will see the deformity behind his mask. And even when tempted, they will remember the words of their prophet. You will not see your Lord until you die. Dajjal's rise will test everything, our knowledge, our discipline, our sincerity. It will not matter how loudly one claimed to be Muslim. What will matter is how deeply one internalized the truth of La ilaha illa Allah. The emergence of Dajjal is not just a test for those who live to see it, it is a warning for every generation. Prepare your hearts now, so that when the world is turned upside down, you will still be standing upright in faith, because the deceiver is waiting, and the world is almost ready. They say some of the most powerful things in this world arrive without thunder or spectacle. And there it stands, a simple black cube in a desert city, silent and unadorned, yet commanding the hearts of millions. The Kaaba, no domes of gold, no minarets touching the clouds, just straight lines and perfect symmetry, but hidden in that simplicity is a gravity that tugs at the soul. Across continents and time zones, 1 billion people turn toward it each day, not out of habit, but out of devotion. Children in villages, elders in metropolises, merchants, scholars and farmers alike all face this singular direction in unison, as though answering an ancient call that still echoes through time. For some, it's a destination of pilgrimage. For others, it's the spiritual anchor of everyday life. But to truly understand why this unassuming stone cube inspires such awe, we have to peel back layers of time, history, and the unseen world. We have to go back, not to a few centuries ago, not even to the early days of Islam, but to the very beginning of humanity's longing for divine connection. Long before the city of Mecca ever rose from the sand, long before language was carved into stone or stories were told around fire, the earth bore witness to the first footsteps of man. According to Islamic tradition, when Adam was sent down from paradise, he wasn't left to wander aimlessly. He was given guidance. Among that guidance was a command to construct a house not for himself, but for God. A place where the divine and human could meet in humility and remembrance. That structure, placed at a sacred point on earth, was the very first house of God, the original Kaaba, built with no grand audience, no kings or architects, just the sincere hands of the first prophet crafting a space of worship under the open sky. There were no walls of marble, no pillars or embellishments, only purpose. A purpose so sacred that even the angels were said to descend around it, mirroring the very circling that humans would later perform. But time is both a gift and a force of erosion. The original structure, humble in its form, would eventually fade. And then came the flood, the great deluge during the time of Prophet Nuh. It wasn't just a storm, it was a reset. Cities, mountains, forests, and memories were swept away in waves that reshaped the very surface of the earth. The house of God, too, was buried under water and sediment, erased from sight, but not from destiny. Yet some places are marked not by what stands upon them, but by the divine energy they hold. Even as the Kaaba vanished physically, its spiritual imprint remained carved into the land and into the consciousness of those who survived. The ground remembered, generations passed, civilizations rose and fell, but the location of that sacred space endured in hearts and oral traditions. People would speak of a blessed land in the desert, a point where the heavens once reached down to meet the earth. And though there were no ruins to point to, the yearning for that place remained alive in those who longed to reconnect with the Creator. It is one thing to lose a structure and another to lose meaning. But in the case of the Kaaba, meaning persisted. That empty space in the heart of Arabia was never truly empty. It pulsed quietly with the promise of return. And return it would, not through conquest or exploration, but through divine command and prophetic mission. For the rebirth of the Kaaba wouldn't begin with stone or architecture. It would begin with faith, a story written in sacrifice, perseverance, and divine love. The story of a barren land that would become the center of the world. The story of a family chosen by God. The story of how a forgotten location would be transformed once again into the spiritual heartbeat of humanity. It began not with abundance, but with sacrifice. Not in a city, but in a barren, windswept valley surrounded by jagged mountains and endless sand. A place so dry and desolate that even birds avoided it. No rivers, no shade, no signs of civilization, just dust, silence, and an overwhelming stillness that made it feel like the edge of the world. Yet this was the land chosen by Allah for something extraordinary to unfold. And into this emptiness came three figures, one man, one woman, and a baby, each unaware that they were about to shape the spiritual destiny of billions. Prophet Ibrahim, a man of unwavering obedience, stood beside his wife Hajar and their infant son Ismail. He had traveled far, following divine instruction, carrying not worldly goods, but a test that would echo through every corner of faith. The command had come with no explanation, only trust. Leave them here, in this lifeless place, then walk away. Imagine the weight of that moment. A father whose heart was bonded to his newborn son, now asked to part ways without protest. A husband who loved his wife dearly, instructed to leave her alone. Not because he did not care, but because he did. And so, without a word, he turned his back and began to walk. The sand muffled his steps, but behind him, Hajar's voice pierced the silence. "Where are you going?" she asked. "Will you leave us here alone?" Her voice trembled, not in panic, but in sheer disbelief. Ibrahim did not stop. Her questions followed him, echoes of a mother's fear and confusion. And then finally, with clarity dawning upon her heart, she asked the one question that mattered. "Has Allah commanded you to do this?" Only then did Ibrahim pause. He turned slightly, his eyes filled with tears and resolution, and nodded. That single gesture said everything. It wasn't abandonment, it was submission to the will of the most merciful. And so Hajar stood, rooted in the scorching sand, watching the figure of her husband fade into the horizon. Alone now, with only the sun above and her child cradled in her arms, she was not consumed by despair. She was anchored by trust. In that moment, her heart made a choice, to believe that if Allah had brought her here, then Allah would not forsake her. But faith alone does not quench thirst. Days passed. The dry winds clawed at her clothes. Her baby cried, a piercing, heart-wrenching sound of hunger and thirst. And the pain of watching a child suffer is a weight no heart should bear. Yet bear it she did. Until finally, driven by desperation wrapped in faith, she ran. She climbed the nearby hill of Safa, scanning the horizon for signs of life. Nothing. She descended, her heart racing, and climbed the next hill, Marwa, hoping for a miracle. Again, nothing. She didn't stop. Back and forth she ran 7 times, her feet blistered, her spirit unbroken. With each run, she wasn't merely searching for water, she was chasing hope. She was declaring with every breath, "I will not give up. I believe help will come." And then, help came. But not from the distant horizon. It came from beneath her very feet. At the place where little Ismail lay crying, the earth trembled, the dry crust cracked, and suddenly water surged forth, a stream so pure, so powerful, that even angels bore witness to it. The angel Jibril had descended and struck the ground, and from that divine act came the well of Zamzam. Water in the middle of nowhere. Life where death had seemed certain. Hajar rushed to contain the gushing stream, building a barrier of earth and stones to prevent it from disappearing back into the ground. She called it Zamzam, meaning stop, stop, as she tried to hold on to the mercy she had just received. And in that moment, the desert was no longer empty. It had become a sanctuary. The well did more than nourish, it transformed. The birds began to circle above it. Life began to stir again. The winds carried the scent of divine mercy through the valley. And as the days passed, a wandering tribe known as Jurhum noticed the birds and followed them to the unexpected water source. What they found was a woman and her child, surrounded by a miracle. They were struck not only by the water, but by Hajar's dignity, her unwavering faith, and the sacred aura that seemed to surround her. They asked to settle near the well. She agreed, but on one condition: the water was hers. The spring belonged not to any tribe or warrior, but to a woman who had trusted her Lord against all odds. And so, around the well of Zamzam, the first community in Mecca began to grow. Tents were pitched, families arrived, livestock returned. And in the heart of this blooming settlement was Hajar, a woman once left alone, now revered as the matriarch of a miracle. Her son, Ismail, grew up not as an orphan of the desert, but as a child of prophecy, surrounded by those who honored the sacredness of his story. And yet the most important part of the story was still to come, for from the depths of hardship, from the silent prayers of a mother running between two hills, and from a spring that broke open the desert silence, the foundation was being laid, not just for a city, but for a sanctuary that would soon become the beating heart of the world. The desert that once seemed lifeless was now transformed. Around the blessed well of Zamzam, tents multiplied, laughter returned, and voices filled the valley where once there had only been the wind. The Jurhum tribe settled permanently, and what had begun as a lone spring became the nucleus of a living community. At the heart of it all stood a woman whose faith had turned barren rock into fertile ground. Hajar, no longer just a mother in isolation, became a figure of deep respect. Her strength, resolve, and connection to the divine were etched into the daily rhythm of life in the valley. Her son, Ismail, was no longer just the child who had cried from thirst in the wilderness. He was growing, walking among the people, learning their language, adopting their customs, and earning their admiration. Raised in a household rooted in trust and obedience to God, he embodied both the grit of survival and the light of spiritual destiny. As the seasons passed, Ismail matured not only in body but in character. He became fluent in the tongue of the Jurhum, shared their meals, joined in their efforts, and won their hearts. His presence was no longer that of an outsider. He belonged. The Jurhum, impressed by his nobility and integrity, welcomed him even more deeply by giving him one of their daughters in marriage. With this union, the bloodline of a prophet merged with the culture of a desert tribe, and together they wove the beginnings of a new legacy, one destined to shape not just a city, but the very future of monotheism. This marriage marked more than a social alliance. It was a divine thread, knitting together the past and the future. From this lineage would come generations of guardians, those who would tend to the sacred well, protect the growing settlement, and eventually become custodians of something far greater. The roots of a community were being planted, not with conquest, but with compassion, integrity, and the blessings of divine intervention. Around the well of Zamzam, life took on a new rhythm. The water gave sustenance, but the story behind it gave meaning. Every sip reminded the people of the miracle that had first drawn them there. Every morning they awoke near that blessed spring was another testimony to the power of faith. They were not just living by a water source, they were living within a promise. And it was within this thriving sanctuary that a unique identity began to take form. The Valley of Mecca was no longer just a place of survival. It was now a spiritual refuge. People from neighboring regions, hearing of the miracle of Zamzam, began to visit. Some came for water, others came out of curiosity. But all who arrived sensed that something was different here. There was an energy in the air, a stillness, a presence that could not be explained through reason alone. They came as travelers, but left as believers. Word began to spread, and Mecca's reputation grew, not through trade or warfare, but through its sanctity. And as the years passed, that sanctity was upheld by the descendants of Ismail. This group, known as Banu Ismail, began to carry the dual weight of family legacy and divine responsibility. They weren't kings or generals. They were custodians, protectors, servants of a trust passed down through revelation. They upheld the values taught by Ibrahim, the courage modeled by Hajar, and the obedience lived by Ismail. They preserved not just the well, but the story that gave it purpose. And that story, whispered through generations, kept pointing to one truth. Something more was coming. A house would rise once again, a house that would be the center of all worship. But first, the hearts had to be prepared. The people had to be grounded. The land had to be worthy. In this environment of growing faith and deep-rooted tradition, the people of Mecca were slowly being shaped by something beyond themselves. They were becoming caretakers of a legacy that stretched back to the dawn of humanity. With every drop drawn from Zamzam, with every child born into the lineage of Ismail, the sacred pulse of the valley grew stronger. And though the Kaaba had not yet been rebuilt, its spirit hovered over the land, waiting to be awakened once more by the hands of those chosen by God. Years turned into decades, and the valley of Mecca, once a forsaken stretch of dust and silence, now thrived with life, memory, and sacred meaning. The well of Zamzam continued to nourish generation after generation, not just with water, but with the legacy of divine intervention. The people of Mecca had grown strong in faith, rooted in the story of Hajar and Ismail, guided by the values handed down from Prophet Ibrahim. But the valley still lacked its centerpiece. The Kaaba, the house of God, remained absent. Its original foundation, once laid by Adam and lost in the flood, had not yet returned to the physical world. Yet Allah's plan does not forget. When the time was right, the call came again, and Ibrahim was summoned once more to the place where his son now lived, grown and dignified. The time had come for father and son to fulfill a sacred mission that would span generations and define the spiritual direction of the world. Upon Ibrahim's arrival in Mecca, after years of separation, father and son were reunited not for leisure or comfort, but for divine duty. The command from Allah was clear: rebuild the house, re-establish the Kaaba, not as a monument of stone, but as a beacon of monotheism, a place where hearts would turn and find direction, a sanctuary where every brick whispered submission. And so, without delay, the two prophets began the work, not with pride, but with prayer. As they placed stone upon stone, they constantly repeated a supplication that would be etched into the pages of Revelation. Our Lord, accept this from us. Truly, you are the all-hearing, the all-knowing. There was no audience, no ceremony, just two believers fulfilling the will of their Creator in the solitude of a sun-scorched valley. The building was simple in form, but immense in meaning. Its proportions, guided by divine wisdom, echoed the perfection of creation itself. As the walls rose from the earth, so too did the spiritual significance of the land. The Kaaba was not just being built, it was being revived. And with each brick, the bond between Ibrahim, Ismail, and their Lord grew stronger. When the final stone was placed and the structure stood completed, the house was not declared a royal estate or tribal symbol. It was proclaimed a sanctuary, a place where none would be superior by bloodline or wealth. A house open to all who sought nearness to the one God. This was the birth of something eternal, an axis around which the faithful would forever revolve. But this house would not stand in isolation. It was meant to be visited, honored, and surrounded by devotion. With the Kaaba now restored, the rites of pilgrimage, Hajj, were introduced. rooted in the very story of its rebirth. Allah commanded Ibrahim to proclaim the pilgrimage to humanity. Though he stood in a remote desert, far from the centers of civilization, he raised his voice in obedience. "O mankind, come to the house of your Lord," he cried. And by the will of Allah, that call traveled through the unseen. It echoed through valleys, across mountains, beyond borders. It reached the hearts of souls yet unborn. From every distant corner of the earth, people would someday answer that call, saying, "Labbaik Allahumma labbaik." Here I am, O Allah, here I am. The rituals of Hajj themselves were not invented anew. They were living reenactments of the trials of Hajar, the trust of Ibrahim, and the sacrifice of Ismail. The running between Safa and Marwa became an act of sacred remembrance. The drinking of Zamzam, a daily miracle made accessible to every pilgrim. The act of Tawaf, circling the Kaaba 7 times, symbolized the orbit of the soul around divine unity, just as the angels circled the throne above. This was not merely a journey of footsteps. It was a journey of the heart, of intention, of surrender. And Mecca, centered around the Kaaba, became more than a city. It became the heart of the earth. The pilgrims who came, initially in small numbers, were not drawn by wealth, architecture, or fame. They came seeking presence. They came to fulfill the prayer of a prophet, to answer the call buried in the winds of time. Each visitor became a thread in the tapestry of sacred tradition. And with each generation, the call grew louder, the path more defined, the pull stronger. The Kaaba had become the gravitational center of spiritual longing, its magnetism unlike anything else on earth. People left behind their homes, wealth and comfort to walk dusty roads and sleep under stars, all to stand before a simple cube of stone that pointed toward the eternal. Through the rebuilding of the Kaaba and the establishment of the pilgrimage, a powerful transformation took place. The land of Mecca, once silent and empty, was now alive with the voices of the faithful. The Kaaba, born from obedience and sacrifice, stood as a living testament that when the human heart aligns with divine purpose, even the most barren of places can bloom with holiness. And as time moved forward, what Ibrahim and Ismail built would continue to serve not just as a building, but as a mirror reflecting the unity of humanity under one Creator, a symbol that would never fade, no matter how much the world around it changed. Long after Ibrahim and Ismail placed the final stone of the Kaaba, long after their footsteps faded into the shifting sands, the sacred house stood, quiet, steadfast, enduring. But the story did not end with the completion of its walls. The Kaaba's legacy was to be protected, passed down through generations, not by empires or armies, but by the hearts of those who knew its story, lived its trials and carried its light. The descendants of Ismail, known as Banu Ismail, were not just caretakers of a structure. They were guardians of meaning. They knew that this house was not built to glorify men, but to glorify the Creator. With each new generation, they carried the responsibility of protecting it, not just from damage, but from distortion. Their role was sacred, not political. They maintained the well of Zamzam. They guided the pilgrims. They upheld the values that had been carved into the foundations of the Kaaba long before a single stone had been laid. As the centuries passed, the tribe of Quraysh rose from among the Banu Ismail. They were known for their strength, honor, and leadership. And among their many clans, one stood out for its nobility of character and purity of lineage, Banu Hashim. It was from this noble line that a child would be born, a child whose presence would awaken the world, a child whose very breath would renew the original purpose of the Kaaba. Muhammad ibn Abdullah, peace be upon him, Orphaned before birth, raised among the people of Mecca, this boy would grow to carry the light of prophethood. Though he was surrounded by a society that had, over time, filled the Kaaba with idols and strayed from the teachings of Ibrahim, Muhammad's heart remained uncorrupted. He would retreat to the mountains, seeking truth, aching for the purity that once defined his people's relationship with the sacred house. And then it came, the first revelation. In the darkness of the cave of Hira, the angel Jibril appeared once more. The message was clear. Humanity's connection to the divine had been clouded, and now it was time to clear the path again. Muhammad was chosen not just to deliver verses, but to restore alignment between the Kaaba and its creator. One by one, the chains of ignorance and false worship began to break. With patience, courage, and unshakable trust in Allah, the Prophet endured exile, persecution, battles, and betrayal. But he never lost sight of the Kaaba. His heart remained tethered to it, not to the stones, but to what it represented: divine unity, submission, and mercy. When he finally returned to Mecca, not as a conqueror, but as a forgiver, his first act was to cleanse the Kaaba. The idols were removed, the chants of ignorance silenced. The house, once again, belonged solely to Allah, and with that, the Kaaba's original identity was not only revived, but sealed. From that moment onward, every act of worship performed in its direction was a renewal of that sacred covenant. Every prayer, every tawaf, every heartfelt dua beneath its shadow was a thread woven back into the grand tapestry of monotheism. The Kaaba was no longer just the heart of Mecca. It became the spiritual heart of the world. And yet the Kaaba's power does not come from its structure. Its walls have been rebuilt, repaired, and fortified many times throughout history. Its covering has changed, its surroundings modernized, but its soul has remained untouched. It is not the black cloth or the golden door that brings people to tears. It is what lies beyond the physical. It is the invisible current that flows through every brick. The knowledge that you are standing in the same place where prophets once stood, prayed, wept, and submitted. The same place where a mother's footsteps became a ritual, where a father's sacrifice became a symbol, and where obedience became the pathway to transcendence. Today, the Kaaba continues to draw the hearts of people across oceans and borders. Rich or poor, known or unknown, all who approach it are leveled by its simplicity and elevated by its meaning. It stands not to separate, but to unite. Every year, millions respond to the call made by Ibrahim and echoed by Muhammad, peace be upon him. They walk around the Kaaba shoulder to shoulder, chanting in one voice, wearing the same garments, erasing the divisions of status and nation. In that moment, they are not individuals. They are a single body, turning around a single center, in awe of a single creator. The Kaaba reminds us that true power lies in surrender. That meaning is not found in ornamentation, but in devotion. That greatness is not in the height of buildings, but in the depth of belief. Its story is not finished, because with every prayer that faces it, with every heart that longs for it, the Kaaba lives on, as a witness to the human soul's eternal yearning to return to its origin, to find its Lord, and to rest in the sacred circle of divine love. A book so mysterious, so controversial, that it was banned, hidden, and nearly erased from religious history. Yet it refuses to disappear. Some call it apocryphal, others heretical, but many wonder, what if there's truth inside? The Book of Enoch claims to contain the words of a prophet who walked with angels, foresaw cataclysms, and was ultimately raised into the heavens. But for Muslims, the question cuts deeper. Could this enigmatic figure be none other than Prophet Idris, upon him be peace, mentioned in the Qur'an, praised for his truthfulness, knowledge, and lofty status? While the Book of Enoch doesn't appear in Islamic scripture, The parallels are striking enough to stir both curiosity and caution. Idris, in Islamic tradition, was no ordinary prophet. He was a sage, a scientist, and a man who transcended his time. So when a lost book surfaces, claiming to be the very revelation given to him, it forces us to ask, can we dismiss it entirely? Or is there something, anything within it that may have once echoed divine truth? Islam teaches us to be careful. To reject outright a scripture that may contain even one sentence from Allah could be spiritually dangerous. Yet to accept it fully when we know it has passed through the hands of men would also be misguided. So we stand at the edge of mystery, peering into an ancient scroll wrapped in legend, heresy, and perhaps a sliver of forgotten revelation. The Book of Enoch unfolds a tale of cosmic events and forbidden unions. It claims that once celestial beings, watchers, descended from the heavens. They were not human. They were not of earth. These beings, the book says, took for themselves wives from the daughters of mankind, and from this union came a new race, the Nephilim, giants, creatures of immense size and power who shook the earth with their violence. They brought chaos, taught forbidden knowledge, and turned the hearts of men to corruption. If this were only myth, it could be ignored. But the text treats it as a memory, a truth passed down from before the flood. In Islamic understanding, however, such tales require a different lens. Angels in Islam do not disobey Allah. They do not fall. They do not marry or lust. So what are we to make of this story? The mistake perhaps lies in the confusion of angels with jinn. Islam recognizes a third creation, neither angel nor human, made of smokeless fire. Jinn, unlike angels, have free will. They can sin, they can love, deceive, tempt, and rebel. They can take forms and influence human beings. Could the fallen ones be misunderstood jinn? Could the giants be the offspring of forbidden human-jinn interaction, legends that later morphed into tales of celestial rebellion? There are even whispers in Islamic folklore of Naznas, beings that were half jinn and half human, deformed, unstable, born of unnatural unions. These tales exist outside the core texts, but they persist in cultures across the Muslim world. And while no solid Islamic source confirms such unions, the idea that jinn and humans interact, sometimes destructively, is well established. It is important to note the cunning of time. Myths evolve, scriptures distort, and stories once sacred are reshaped by human hands. The Book of Enoch, as we have it today, has traveled through Ge'ez, Aramaic, and Greek. It has been copied, altered, and likely corrupted. Yet something remains, a fire that refuses to go out, an echo that won't be silenced. When we peel back the layers, we find in its core a warning, a story of transgression, divine wrath, and the collapse of civilizations. And while Islam doesn't validate the specifics of the Enochian giants, it gives us its own framework. A world where jinn whisper in the shadows. A world where some of the earliest humans were truly giants, towering descendants of Adam, whose height was said to be 60 cubits. A world where sins once mounted so high that a flood was sent to cleanse the earth. So perhaps the Book of Enoch, though clouded by error, still points toward a truth that resonates deeply with the Islamic worldview. One in which unseen beings walk among us. History is far stranger than we think, and prophets like Idris knew secrets that the world has long forgotten. Long before the rains fell and the earth was drowned in a flood that would reset the course of humanity, there were whispers of its coming. Not among ordinary people, but from a prophet who walked between the realms of the seen and the unseen. According to the Book of Enoch, he had dreams, terrifying, symbolic, and divine. One such dream showed the destruction of the earth through water, a massive flood that would wash away corruption and sin. Enoch saw the sins of men multiply, the violence of the giants increase, and the heavens themselves grow weary of what was happening below. He warned those around him, pleaded with them to return to righteousness, and prayed for a future generation that would survive. Islamic tradition aligns with this idea that the early prophets, including Idris, were witnesses to the moral decay of their times. Although the Qur'an does not speak of Idris' warning of a flood, it places him before Nuh, upon him be peace, in the prophetic timeline. And since Prophet Idris lived in a period where humanity was still fresh from the creation of Adam, yet already falling into spiritual decline, it's entirely possible that he foresaw what was coming. Whether through divine inspiration or through dreams granted by Allah, Idris may have glimpsed the eventual downfall of his people. The Book of Enoch presents these visions in poetic, symbolic language. Mountains melting like wax, stars falling, beasts running in terror, and through it all, the voice of Enoch crying out for justice. In one vision, he even pleads for the children of the giants, the Nephilim, begging Allah to forgive them. But the answer he receives is clear: there will be no mercy for them. Their corruption is too great. Their time has come to an end. There is another dream, more cryptic but equally powerful. This dream presents the history of humanity as a sequence of animals. Adam is seen as a white bull, his descendants as black and red cattle, symbolic of good and evil. It continues down through generations, portraying prophets as stars, nations as beasts, and finally foretelling the arrival of a great one, referred to in the book as the Son of Man. While this language clearly carries Judeo-Christian influences, the idea of visions through symbolic representations is not foreign to Islam. In fact, many prophets received guidance through dreams. Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam interpreted dreams in symbolic terms, understanding animals, stars, and natural elements as metaphors for people and events. Could Enoch or Idris have been given a similar gift? Could these symbolic dreams be remnants of actual visions that were misunderstood and reinterpreted over time? Perhaps the flood he saw was real. Perhaps his warnings were echoed by Nuh generations later. The Qur'an tells us that all prophets came with signs and warnings, and that their messages were often repeated through time. So maybe Idris saw the beginning of the downfall. Maybe Nuh saw the end of it. Together their legacies form a chain: warning, then action, then survival. And between them, a generation that refused to listen, lost forever beneath the waters. Prophet Idris is said to have received 30 scrolls of divine revelation, sheets of knowledge that carried guidance, law, and wisdom for his people. Not a full book like the Qur'an, but enough to light the way in a darkening world. Now imagine discovering a mysterious ancient text scattered across 3 languages, each version slightly different, but all claiming to be the words of Enoch. That's exactly what happened when the Book of Enoch was uncovered, first in Ethiopia, then in Egypt, and finally among the Dead Sea Scrolls near Qumran. The oldest full version was in Ge'ez, the liturgical language of the Ethiopian Church, brought to Europe by a Scottish explorer named James Bruce in 1773. Later, fragments in Greek were found in a Christian cemetery in Egypt, showing that the book had spread far beyond its place of origin. But perhaps the most astonishing discovery was in 1947, when fragments in Aramaic, likely the original language of the book, were found in the caves of Qumran, alongside other ancient scrolls. These fragments confirm that the Book of Enoch was widely read and revered by early Jewish sects before being excluded from later versions of the Bible. But more importantly, they raise a profound question for Muslims. Could these ancient scrolls contain echoes of the actual Suhuf scrolls given to Prophet Idris? In Islam, we are taught to respect all prophets and the scriptures they received, even if those scriptures no longer exist in pure form. The Torah, the Psalms, the Gospel, all were once divine, even if the versions we have today are altered. The Suhuf of Ibrahim and the Suhuf of Idris are less known and less discussed, but they are part of our belief. So when a book appears that claims to come from Idris, we cannot casually dismiss it. At the same time, we are warned not to accept everything blindly. The Book of Enoch contains truths, half-truths, and embellishments. It speaks of divine judgment, of celestial justice, of prophetic warnings that sound eerily familiar to Islamic teachings. But it also includes details that clash with core Islamic beliefs, like angels committing sin or bearing children. These distortions may be the result of human interference, scribes rewriting, cultures adding their own interpretations, truths being reshaped to fit new agendas. Yet the existence of multiple versions of the book in different places at different times all point to an origin rooted in something much older, something sacred. Perhaps hidden among these pages is a faded reflection of the original message given to Idris. And that's what makes this book both dangerous and fascinating. To read it is to walk a tightrope between curiosity and caution, between myth and memory, between what was sent from above and what was written by men below. Islam doesn't tell us to read such texts for belief, but perhaps for awareness, to recognize how truth survives even when buried, and how a prophet's voice may still echo through time, waiting for those willing to listen with wisdom and restraint. The idea of giants might sound like something pulled from fantasy novels or ancient legends, but in the Islamic tradition, the concept isn't so far-fetched. We don't use the word giants as often, but we do speak of enormous people, ancient generations who were physically and spiritually unlike anything we see today. The Prophet Muhammad said that Adam alayhi salam was created by Allah at a height of 60 cubits. That's nearly 30 to 40 meters tall. And this wasn't just a poetic description. The Hadith is clear, and it tells us more, that ever since Adam, the stature of humanity has been decreasing. Now consider this. Idris, upon him be peace, lived just a few generations after Adam. The Qur'an places him between Adam and Nuh. And we know from Hadith and Tafsir that those early generations were closer to the original human design. They were stronger, taller, lived longer lives, and possessed knowledge and memory that linked them directly to the first man created by Allah with his own hands. If Adam was a towering figure of unimaginable height, what of his children and grandchildren? What of the people who lived during Idris's time? The Quran confirms the existence of powerful and physically intimidating nations. Take, for example, the people of Ad, to whom the Prophet Hud, upon him be peace, was sent. Allah describes them as arrogant giants who said, "Who is stronger than us in power?" They built colossal structures and defied every warning given to them, believing their size and strength made them untouchable. They were so mighty that they left behind architecture that defies explanation, carving homes into mountains and erecting monuments in desolate lands. Tafsir literature further expands on this, describing their large builds, immense physical capabilities, and their eventual downfall when a devastating windstorm wiped them from the face of the earth. And Idris alayhi salam? He lived before these people, at a time when humanity was even closer to Adam in form and strength. So although Islamic texts don't use the term Nephilim or describe beings exactly like those in the Book of Enoch, the idea that there once existed extremely tall, powerful human beings is not foreign to our tradition. The early humans, both prophets and disbelievers alike, lived in a reality that would seem alien to us today. Their bodies were different, their lifespans were longer, their connection to the spiritual world was stronger. In this sense, the giants of the Book of Enoch may not be entirely mythical. They could be the exaggerated memories of a real truth, amplified through generations of retelling, but rooted in the undeniable fact that the first humans were, by design, much greater in stature than those who came after. And now we arrive at one of the most fascinating and mysterious encounters recorded in Islamic tradition: the meeting between Prophet Idris and the angel of death, Azrael. Unlike most human beings who fear death, Idris walked toward it with open eyes. The story goes that Idris, due to his intense worship and love for Allah, wanted to experience the pain of death, not out of morbid curiosity, but so that he could return to life and never forget its severity. He believed that if he tasted death even once, his worship would reach a level of intensity that no one else could achieve. Azrael, intrigued by the sincerity of this prophet, sought permission from Allah, and it was granted. Idris tasted death and was then brought back to life. His reaction was immediate and profound. He said the pain was beyond anything he had imagined. In some narrations, he described it as the feeling of a living animal being skinned, unbearable and unforgettable. But this experience only deepened his connection to Allah. Then Idris made another request. He wanted to see hell, not to satisfy curiosity, but to increase his fear, to make his heart tremble so he would never relax in his worship. Again, permission was granted. The gates of hell were opened just a sliver, enough for the sounds, the heat and the screams to reach his ears. Idris collapsed, overwhelmed by what he had seen, and yet, even after witnessing such terror, he stood again with even greater resolve. His final request was to see paradise. And here, the story takes a miraculous turn. Azrael brought him to the gates, and as Idris beheld its beauty, the rivers, the trees, the peace, he asked to taste its fruits, to drink from its waters. He entered just for a moment and felt a joy unlike anything he had ever known. But when Azrael said it was time to leave, Idris refused. He clung to a branch, held his ground and said, "I will not leave." What followed was a divine conversation, one that revealed the spiritual genius of Idris. He argued his case using verses from the Qur'an. "Every soul shall taste death, and I have tasted it. None shall escape hell, and I have passed by it. They shall not be removed from paradise. And now I am here." Each verse, a divine truth, became a legal proof. Azrael, unable to refute him, turned to Allah for guidance, and Allah, in His infinite wisdom, responded not with anger but with approval. "My servant has spoken the truth. I decreed his death with you. I brought him to paradise by my command, and by my command he shall never leave." Idris was granted an honor no other prophet had before the Day of Judgment. He remained in paradise alive, rewarded for his devotion and intellect. This moment is not just a miraculous tale, it is a deep reflection on the power of sincere worship, the beauty of divine justice, and the closeness a servant can achieve with Allah when his heart is pure. Idris didn't fear death, he didn't run from hell, he didn't crave paradise for pleasure, but for longing to be closer to his Creator. And Allah responded with mercy and majesty, granting him what he sought, not because he demanded it, but because he earned it. This meeting between Idris and Azrael teaches us that the doors to divine proximity are open to those who seek them with sincerity, wisdom, and unwavering devotion. It shows us that worship isn't just rituals, it's the way a person walks through life, the choices they make, and the intensity with which they love Allah. And above all, it reminds us that the stories of the prophets aren't just tales of the past. They are blueprints for those who wish to rise. Among all the prophets mentioned in Islam, there is something uniquely profound about Idris. Upon him, peace be upon him. He wasn't just a prophet who guided his people. He was a pioneer in almost every sense of the word. Islamic sources tell us he was the first human being to write with a pen. In a world where oral tradition dominated, Idris introduced the permanence of ink, preserving knowledge that would outlast generations. He looked at the stars, not as objects of worship, but as signs. He studied their movement, calculated time, and laid the foundations for astronomy. He examined the natural world, understood patterns, and began to interpret the unseen with the lens of divine knowledge. Idris also became the first to measure weights and use scales, to sew garments with thread and needle, to design clothes that were fitted and functional, skills that seem mundane to us today, but were revolutionary in the earliest days of mankind. Each of these accomplishments was not merely for survival or convenience, they were acts of worship. It is said that with every movement of his needle as he stitched garments, Idris would whisper praises of Allah, and by the end of each day, his dhikr would outweigh that of everyone else on earth. This merging of spiritual excellence and worldly mastery made him a role model for both realms. While some prophets emphasized the unseen, Idris stood as an example of how divine knowledge could be used to uplift worldly life without being enslaved by it. He didn't retreat from society into isolation. Instead, he advanced civilization, teaching his people how to write, how to calculate, how to observe the skies, how to build, and most importantly, how to remain sincere and humble in the process. He taught that knowledge was not power, it was a trust. He warned against arrogance and reminded his people that skills and achievements are meaningless if they do not bring one closer to the Creator. His wisdom was not only in words, but in how he lived. There are reports that Idris divided his time in a disciplined rhythm, 3 days a week for preaching and guiding others, and 4 days in solitude, wandering through the land, worshipping Allah in silence and reflection. During those 4 days, he would fast, remember Allah, contemplate his creation, and seek nothing from the world. And yet even in those silent days, his presence was known. Angels would descend to be in his company, and his name would echo in the heavens. He had such closeness to the angelic realm that when one of the angels, overwhelmed by his kindness and devotion, sought to befriend him, Allah permitted the bond. Idris taught that true knowledge is what humbles a person. The more you know, the more you understand your own limitations. The more you study the universe, the more you realize its maker is beyond comprehension. He warned his followers against letting wealth or intelligence blind them. To him, the real sign of intelligence was humility. The real measure of wealth was contentment. And the real purpose of life was to prepare for what comes after it. Then there's the moment that changed everything, a moment that no other prophet, no other human being had ever experienced before. Idris was not destined to die like other men. The Qur'an says, "And we raised him to a high station." Scholars have long debated what that station was. Some say it refers to his honor in the sight of Allah. Others say it means he was given unique knowledge and status, but the majority of scholars agree it means Idris was physically raised to the heavens. During the miraculous night journey of the Prophet Muhammad, he encountered Idris in one of the levels of the heavens. And what does that mean? It means Idris didn't just live a righteous life, he transcended the earthly realm altogether. He was honored not just with knowledge, but with ascension. To be raised into the heavens is not a symbolic act in Islamic theology, it is real. The Quran affirms that Prophet Isa ﷺ was also raised alive into the skies and will return before the day of judgment. In a similar way, Idris was lifted, not because of a mission to return, but as a reward for his deep devotion and purity. It is said that his soul and body were purified to the point that they could no longer be confined by the physical world. He no longer needed to eat or drink. His desires faded. His essence aligned so closely with the angelic that he became suited for the celestial realm. And so Allah took him, honored him, not with death, but with elevation. Imagine what kind of life a man must live to deserve such a fate. What kind of worship must he offer? What kind of sincerity must burn in his heart? Idris is a shining example of what it means to merge faith and reason, spirit and intellect, knowledge and humility. In him, we find the blueprint for a balanced life, to seek knowledge, to perfect your craft, to contribute to society, and yet never let the world distract you from the one who created it. His elevation into the heavens is a reminder that this world is not the limit, that the path of sincerity and truth can lead you far beyond the boundaries of time and space, and that among the billions who walk this earth, there are those few, those chosen, who ascend, not because they were kings, not because they were powerful, but because they were devoted, because they lived not for themselves, but for the one who gave them life. And through that devotion, they reached heights no empire could ever dream of. Prophet Idris alayhi salam was not only known for his groundbreaking inventions or celestial journey, but also for the wisdom he left behind. Timeless advice that continues to resonate in every generation. His words were simple, but their meaning was deep. He once said, "The wiser a person becomes, the more humble he should be." In a world that often equates knowledge with pride, Idris reminded his people that true wisdom lowers the ego, not inflates it. He warned them that arrogance is the beginning of spiritual blindness. The smarter you think you are, the more likely you are to ignore the very truth that could save you. He taught that intelligence is not the ability to win arguments, but the capacity to listen, reflect, and admit your limitations in front of Allah. Idris also spoke about wealth, not just the kind measured in gold or livestock, but the kind that silently takes root in the heart. He said, "Whoever is not content with what Allah has given will never feel rich, even if he owns the whole world." He explained that chasing after the world is like drinking salt water. The more you consume, the thirstier you become. Satisfaction, he said, is not found in abundance, but in gratitude. A heart that is pleased with its portion has already defeated poverty. He also advised that love for this world and love for the hereafter cannot reside in the same heart. One will eventually drive the other out. Either you live with your eyes fixed on what fades, or you live with your soul yearning for what lasts. But you cannot walk in both directions at once. He warned against jealousy, calling it a fire that burns the one who holds it. Idris said that when you envy what Allah gave to someone else, you are not just questioning their blessing, you are questioning Allah's wisdom. Instead, he urged his followers to pray sincerely, fast with intention, give quietly, and speak gently. To Idris, even the smallest act done with sincerity was heavier in the scales than mountains of empty ritual. He emphasized that no one's gratitude can ever match the blessings Allah gives, but trying to show that gratitude, sincerely and humbly, was the key to nearness to the divine. His teachings are as relevant today as they were thousands of years ago. In an age drowning in distractions, ego, materialism, and constant comparison, Idris's wisdom stands as a lighthouse for those lost in the fog. He didn't teach long philosophies or impose complicated rituals. He simply reminded people to look inward, to quiet the noise, and to align their actions with their soul's deepest need, Allah. And in doing so, he shaped not only the people of his time, but he left behind a legacy of wisdom that transcends eras. Idris alayhi salam may have lived in a time far removed from ours, but his journey speaks to every soul searching for truth. He lived not for fame, not for power, not even for recognition. He lived for purpose. His story tells us that it is possible to be deeply rooted in this world, working, inventing, creating, while still rising above it spiritually. He was a tailor who stitched garments with remembrance, a scientist who read the stars not for astrology but for divine signs, a leader who carried the weight of his people's sins in his prayers even when they rejected him, and he was a servant who longed so much for his Creator that Allah opened to him the realms of the unseen. Idris was not just a prophet of the past, he is a timeless example of what it means to live a meaningful life. His legacy also shows that elevation doesn't come from lineage, status, or worldly achievements. It comes from the purity of your heart and the sincerity of your actions. While others build empires that crumble, Idris built a connection with the heavens that endured. While others chased pleasures that vanished, Idris pursued knowledge and worship that earned him a place among the stars. Even the angels, created from pure light, marveled at his devotion. They questioned why he, a being made of clay, was given entry into paradise before them, and the answer was profound. They were created without desires, without ego, without tests. Idris had all of those and still chose Allah. He faced temptation but remained pure. He was surrounded by darkness but carried light. He was given power but chose humility. And because of that, he was lifted not only in body but in status, in legacy, in the eternal record of those closest to the divine. Today, as we walk through our lives surrounded by noise, confusion, and endless distractions, we can look to Idris as a beacon, not just as a prophet, but as a teacher, a thinker, a builder of both worldly benefit and spiritual strength. His life teaches us that faith is not separate from action, that spirituality is not separate from intelligence, and that a person does not have to choose between being useful in this world and successful in the next. Idris did both. He transformed the earth with his hands and touched the heavens with his soul. His story is a reminder that greatness in Islam is measured not by how much you possess, but by how much you surrender to Allah, not by how high you rise in worldly ranks, but how low you bow in worship. His elevation to paradise was not a reward for rituals, but a result of a life entirely dedicated to truth, sincerity, and the love of his Lord. And so, when you remember Idris, don't think of a distant historical figure lost in the folds of time. Think of a man who made every moment of his life count, who prayed with his hands and his heart, who served his people while serving his Creator, who saw this world for what it was, a test, a temporary station on the way to eternal truth. He remains alive today in a realm beyond ours, not just as a man who lived, but as a man who truly understood what it meant to live. And in that understanding lies the secret for all of us. If we, like Idris, choose sincerity over show, gratitude over greed, and the hereafter over fleeting pleasure, then perhaps we too will be counted among those who rise, not by wings or miracles, but by the strength of a heart anchored firmly in the love of Allah.